Welcome to the Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast, Season 2, with voices from Alpha and Y Disciple out of Net Ministries. My name is Jordan, and I'm here with my friends,
Jason Kidd,
Annie Grandell.
And we're talking about specifically confirmation, moving the space of confirmation from a transactional approach to a transformational approach. And this episode's title is Content Still Isn't King, which is a direct callback to what we did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, with last season.
Yeah. And we had a episode titles that said Content Isn't King. Can you just remind us a little bit what we talked about, why we talked about it back then, and then where we're going this time?
So last season, we had an episode called Content Isn't King, and we had a special guest, Jim Beckman, who's the founding architect of Y Disciple and generally known as like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Catholic youth ministry. Yes. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things he said in that episode is, while content isn't king, it might be queen. And his point was that the deposit of faith, that teaching true things is vitally important. But we cannot solve all the problems about, in this context, confirmation, by just throwing the best content at it. Like, that's not going to address the heart of a lot of the issues. And so what we talked about a lot last season was context, the context of discipleship, of relationships, of accompaniment. And so we just want to dive in this season into what that looks like in the confirmation space. Because really content is the thing that you and I, Jordan, bonded over initially when we first met.
Yeah. That was a moment. Yeah, go ahead. You relay your version, and I'll sprinkle in mine.
Great. So we were called on as content providers. Neither of us had met to put together a content bundle. It was in the middle of COVID. And Jordan and I were the two people on the call. So we were the people who were called in as content providers, Y Disciple and Alpha. And we were the ones on the call saying, content isn't the answer.
we actually literally said out loud multiple times, content's not the answer for the season. Like, it's not.
And we looked at each other and said, did we just become best friends?
No, I looked at you and I was like, oh man, I like her. Like, what she's doing, she's saying something that is actually, she sees something that I see. And then your daughter came on screen in the background with the blue marker and used your Zoom screen as a way to like draw on herself in big blue marker. And
she painted her whole body.
Yeah, and
blue.
You knew what was happening. And you saw it in the screen and you unfazed. And I was like, this girl's awesome.
She was taking advantage of me being on a work call. She was 4. And she was like, if mom's on this call, she can't stop me. And so was like off to the side, outside, using my computer as a mirror and painted her entire body blue. And that's Marjorie for you. Like, that really sums her up.
Smurfs.
That was the best. Okay, but from that, we launched this Youth Ministry Mindset podcast. You just kind of went over what we talked about a little bit. And that was during a season of massive reorientation in the youth world, post-COVID reality. And it was good. Like, a lot of the churches found that really helpful, and it's actually still getting a lot of airplay right now, which is people are finding it helpful to lay down some better foundations. But there was a common question we got all the time is like, okay, but what is Alpha and what is Y Disciple? Like, we never actually would talk about Alpha or talk about Y Disciple.
Yeah.
We actually was like, no, here's things we need to press into. So Jason, what is Alpha?
Yeah, Alpha is a ministry that helps the church make space for people who don't go to church, or maybe they go to church occasionally, and to really process the life's biggest questions about life and faith and purpose. And so, in Catholic speak, it's kind of the inquiry phase or kind of pre-evangelization and the proclamation of the gospel. So at Alpha, people are invited to a space that's very hospitable for a great meal. Then they hear and discuss like some of the most common questions around Christianity. And they hear the church's perspective on things like who is God, who is Jesus, what is prayer, who is the Holy Spirit. And then the majority of the time is in a small group where a host doesn't teach again, but rather fosters conversation looking at these questions where people can start to process and chew on what they've heard and say what they believe.
Yeah. And we're seeing it run in schools and youth ministers. We're actually seeing people run in confirmation, which has kind of sparked this kind of like, oh, we should just talk about this.
Yeah.
And we're seeing hearing amazing stories, and Jesus is showing up in really beautiful and profound ways. Some of my favorite stories are actually coming from the Catholic space right now with Alpha Youth. So, okay, that's Alpha Youth or Alpha. And Annie, like, what is Y Disciple?
First, I want to give a little love to Alpha because my husband and I, just before we met, so in 2019, our parish was offering the Alpha course. And we thought, you know what? We've heard so much about this thing. Let's just go through it as participants. And when you're in seats like we are, we very rarely get to participate in a thing without getting pulled into leadership somehow.
That's real life for sure.
Yes. And so we just went through it to be intentional and go through it. We weren't trying to observe. And it was transformational for our own personal spiritual lives, for our marriage. It changed so much for us. And it was because we just went back to the gospel. Pope Francis talks about it, like how we talk about the gospel, the kerygma, as primary, not because it's the first thing you do and then you move on from, but you come back to it over and over again. And so for us to go through that was such a profound experience, to go back to the gospel. So I'm a huge fan of Alpha. Y Disciple comes out of Net Ministries now. And what we do is we create a digital toolbox for adults to do small group discipleship with teenagers in the Catholic space. And so that digital toolbox includes training for adults, both the ministry leader as well as the adult mentors who are walking with teenagers, and content for them to share in their small groups, for them to look at what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And we're really intentional with calling it a toolbox because there is no such thing as a discipleship program. It doesn't matter how good our content is, and we put a lot of energy into it being high quality content, and heresy free, hooray. But if the flesh and blood adults in the room with teenagers don't know how to engage the real teenagers in front of them, it's all going to fall flat. So we want to put tools in the hands of mature disciples to accompany Catholic teenagers in a small group setting.
And this is that cultural reality that we both share between Alpha and Y Disciple that was like, oh, we can do this together. And we've been figuring out kingdom collaboration together for a couple of years. So, all right. But in this episode, we're talking confirmation, and we're saying the content still isn't king. And Jason, could you just give us a really quick summary of what we're talking about, and let's introduce our guest.
Yeah, well, we're stoked to have Edmund Mitchell, who is truly one of the thought leaders around youth ministry, especially post-COVID. And so we're talking about, yes, there's content, and that's a piece of the pie, and it's an important piece of the pie. It is not king, though. And we're going to dive in a little bit into the context of Gen Z and in youth ministry, specifically in confirmation preparation. So Edmund has got podcasts. He's been involved in some amazing projects. We are so happy to have you, Edmund.
Yeah, it's really great to be here. All the ministries present are really like some of my favorites, so I'm really honored to be on.
Oh, that's kind of you, man. Well, we're just grateful you're here.
So, Edmund, we're starting all of our conversations with our guests with one simple, fun question. We're talking about confirmation this season. Who was your confirmation saint, and why did you choose him?
Yeah, my confirmation saint, I got confirmed in 8th grade. I picked St. Michael the Archangel because he had a sword in the photo.
Yeah.
And he's an archangel. I mean, why would you not? So what drew you to the sword?
I don't know, just hacking stuff, testosterone, being a man. I don't know.
It's 8th grade boy.
It's an 8th grade boy. It's like you just walk around hitting stuff saying, man. Yeah. That's what you do as an 8th grade boy.
That's great.
Tell us a little about your experience in ministry. You know, I know you've been around in different spaces, but tell us some of that story.
Yeah, so I'm a recovering super Catholic. I mean, I was cradle Catholic and raised my whole life, and one of those classic firstborn, like do everything right, try to get straight A's. And I went to Georgia Tech for college because I just wanted to be rich and people to think I was smart. And so that was like the best school I could get into.
Nice.
And then had an experience with a campus ministry there. Well, actually, there wasn't much of one. Got involved there in trying to start one with other people, and slowly started discerning a call to a different career path. And I was really into Scott Hahn books, and I saw that he taught in the back of one of his books, it said he taught at Franciscan University. So I called the admissions office and I said, I think I want to be Scott Hahn. And the guy on the other end laughed, and he said, I don't think that's a career path. And I said, okay, well, I'm not satisfied being a volunteer. Like there's something that doesn't sit right with me about just volunteering my time. I want to be really involved in evangelization. And he told me about, I love the conversation I was listening to before I came on, because he talked about this word catechesis. And I thought, I'm going to go the Scott Hahn path. I'm going to be a Bible scholar. And when this person described catechesis, my heart just like kind of caught on fire. I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. Like, cool. I want to take God's message and bring it to people. So flash forward to, 10 years of parish ministry. And I love it. I think it's a unique calling for me. And I still consider myself a parish minister and coach parish ministers. But yeah, so I guess the short answer to your question is my experience was good.
That's awesome.
Okay, real fast. Can you unpack super Catholic?
Yeah.
Because you said that, and I was like,
recovering.
He said recovering super Catholic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, in high school, I dated a very sweet Protestant girl, and she was very involved in her faith. And I was pretty involved too, but just as a subject that I could know stuff about to get favor from adults, And but one day, Jeff Cavins actually came to our parish and put on the Great Adventure Bible Timeline. And I love frameworks or big picture. ADHD, you want shortcuts. And to have like a big picture of the Bible was really powerful for me. But also seeing someone that wasn't a priest, I love priests, but seeing someone that wasn't a priest that had devoted his life to this was really powerful. So my dad handed me Rome Sweet Home. They were selling Scott Hahn books. I guess Jeff Cavins was making money off of Scott Hahn, and gave me Rome Sweet Home to give to my girlfriend to make her Catholic. Well, I read almost the whole thing in the parking lot, and I just became obsessed. And so I'm reading all of these books. And so if people are listening who can relate to this, it's like you're listening to everything Father Mike Schmitz puts out. You've read every Scott Hahn book. Like if you look at all the YouTube channels you're subscribed to, like it's just all the Catholic stuff. But then when I got out into the world, when I became a real adult, like graduated from college, went out into the world, I realized that everything I was consuming and most of my time was spent, to bring up the content conversation, I had reached this point where most of it, I would go to other people to encounter the gospel or to encounter Jesus. And so I'm hearing how Scott Hahn has been transformed personally by the content of the Deposit of Faith's teaching on the Trinity. And then he incarnates it himself, and it turns into this message. He becomes like a prophet of God's message. And then I'm impacted by it, but I'm not quoting church teaching. I'm quoting Scott Hahn. I'm like, like Scott Hahn says, God is a trinity of persons. And so it bothered me, and I realized I needed to go back to the sources. I had my own like resource mon, and I started reading about the catechism. Instead of reading it, I started reading about it and realized, like, why are more people not talking about this? This isn't just an intellectual thing. This is one of the most important gifts of the last couple centuries since the 1500s. And it's deeply evangelistic. And I hadn't understood the connection. I hadn't understood how to connect the head and the heart that I was experiencing in the church and in my faith in such a powerful way until I started learning what a gift the catechism really is and the methodology behind it, the intention behind it. So that really transformed everything. So I say recovering because I went down the path of like all about the content and then needed to kind of, it's not that I pushed the content away, but I was inspired to go like deeper and go to the sources. And Yeah. And so that's why I say recovering.
Yeah, that's so great. I love the backstory there, because the first time I ever heard your name was when I was a parish ministry leader. You were the Bible and catechism guy. You were still in parish ministry as well. And it was blog posts at the time, but talking about the need for both the Bible and the catechism in ministry. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that became your thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird how God, grace builds on nature. Like, it's a combination of, I'm in parish ministry. I also, I'm very creative, and I have an incessant desire to express myself to anyone who will listen. And I like the process of being affected by something personally, and then creating art or creating messages or speaking to people about what I've learned. And so that was just kind of the natural thing for me. I'm also, maybe from earlier, one of my answers gave this away, I'm kind of a nonconformist. So if there's something that everyone thinks is one way, I'm very drawn to how can we pitch it a different way.
Sure.
And the catechism, for me and for other people I knew, it was like, oh, this is just dry intellectual knowledge. Like, we're trying to get into the kerygma and preaching Jesus. And I found the kerygma in the catechism, and I found people like Father Raniero Cantalamessa, who's a preacher to the papal household, this amazing, charismatic Franciscan friar who decides to give, I think it's 2 of his 4 Advent sermons to the papal household. He speaks about the catechism, and he described it as, he said in one quote, he said, I would like to try to show you how the catechism can be picked up like a violin and used to rouse the heart of man.
Wow.
And so he spoke with this just like very charismatic language about the catechism. So obviously I just started creating from that. Like I wanted a space to encourage people to encounter the pulsating heart of the catechism like I had, and begin praying with it, and not just treating it as intellectual information.
Yeah. Oh.
I love that connection between the heart and the head, that we all must go through that journey. When we look at good content, how can that serve confirmation preparation? And I'm thinking of our audience that might be the mom who's tapped on the shoulder to lead confirmation this year because she's got a kid that needs it, or maybe you're a full-time youth minister or somewhere in between. But yeah, how can good content serve confirmation prep?
Yeah, I mean, I think about many volunteers, like they really are the saints in ministry and parish ministry, because they're volunteering their time, and they have limited time, and they might come across these conversations that we in the ministry world are very familiar with, which is content isn't, like you're talking about, like content's not king, or maybe just confused about, is it okay for me to be using content? Should I not be using content? Should I be approaching this hour and a half I have with 8th graders as if I'm Scott Hahn, reincarnated to give the most amazing lecture and sermon, or do I put on something that I feel is really powerful? Like, you come across some of these resources, Alpha and Why Disciple, some of these things that you're like, this is really moving. I want to share this with people. So I feel for volunteers who might overhear that. But I think about the fact that, Jesus didn't use the internet or social media or toilet paper, So it's content,
Boom.
Yeah, everything is content. Jesus himself was handed a scroll and stood up in the synagogue, read from it, and then taught and connected God's word, the content in a format that was handed to him. He selected, but he was handed a scroll, and he selected from within the scroll. And I think of volunteers who they're handed a curriculum. They have some choice of what type of content to choose or to proclaim, let's say. And then they're given this special opportunity after or before the content to connect to people in front of them in a way that can be deeply evangelistic and charismatic. So I think content is an aid. It's only as good as the evangelist, the person there. but it's such a powerful thing. I mean, like I'm sure if we went around the room, all of us have really impactful, really powerful memories of consuming some form of content with someone we love that we'll never be able to forget. Like the first time you saw Star Wars with your dad, some series you watched with someone that opened up deep conversations. And I think that's what really good content like what you guys make can do. It can open up good conversations, and it's an aid.
I love that.
I love that framing.
So what doesn't content solve, especially in the conversation around confirmation?
Yeah. Content doesn't replace the witness. You know, I know you guys all know this, but the church's letter on evangelization, Evangelii Nuntiandi, it says, modern man will listen more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if modern man does listen to teachers, it's because they were first witnesses. So the content doesn't replace the witness of your life. I mean, these people these people I looked up to who were authors or speakers, when I think back on it, it really was their life that was powerful. You know, while I was at Georgia Tech, I listened to a talk by Jeff Cavins. It was, it was on the Eucharist as true food, or it was something. It had a really catchy title. I must have listened to this particular talk 100 times. I memorized, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz. Like Jeff Cavins says that in the talk, and it hit me, and it was powerful. And I memorized it because I was like, that was so cool. I want to be like that. But I think that is a great example of what content can't replace, is that just saying the words doesn't make my life witness the same as Jeff Cavins. It doesn't make it powerful. Like I wasn't living a life that backed up this cool thing, and so it doesn't replace the witness. And I think it also doesn't replace the application to someone's life. Like, the kid in your class whose mom is bipolar and whose dad left when he was 2. Like, you have to this is literally at the bedrock of the plan for salvation that God gave the church, is that what the gospel is missing is your expression of it today to the people that God put in front of you, and he wants to cooperate with you. And so, yes, like Jesus is the Son of God, and that's the same thing, and we can all repeat it over and over again, but it means something different when I say it, and it means something different. You know what I mean? Like, not that it means something different, but there's something behind it. There's a person behind it when you say it or when you talk about it. So those are things I think it doesn't replace.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I kind of want to go on the flip then. As we think about content, what is the non-negotiable content that we have to share in the space of confirmation prep? Like, in your opinion, in your thoughts, like we have to share this.
Yeah, I mean, when I would train volunteers as catechists, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this or do talk about this a lot, if I only have a few minutes, it's just the charisma, the basic gospel message, because it is true that we might only have a few sessions, we might only have a limited amount of time, and we might be in front of people that are either indifferent or actively hostile to the lesson.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the correct answer is it's all essential. The more helpful answer is, if you had to focus on like one thing, it's Catechism paragraph 1, it's the gospel message, it's a kerygma. And I think I would probably say, instead of saying what is essential, I would say, what is the most helpful, simple framework that sets someone up to fill in the rest. So you're not giving them random individual pearls and saying, at the end of your life, you'll have all these pearls of Catholic teaching. You're trying to help them understand the spokes on a wheel,
Yeah.
that the center is Jesus in the kerygma,
Yeah.
and that everything else does fit in. Everything else is connected to that and comes out of that. And later you can figure out like the varying degrees of spiration in theology. But we're like, if we can at least get the center, the kerygma, then you've set people up well with a framework, you know?
Yeah.
I love that.
I think it was Pope Benedict that said we can no longer presume faith for the baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the young people who are coming to us for confirmation, many of them are not sure what they believe. You know, maybe they've had some education, maybe they haven't. And so I think a thing that comes to mind for me is we have to do it in the proper order, so that they can start at the beginning and slow down and go through this process to understand some of these basics. You know, I'm thinking of like St. Paul when he says, when you have an infant and you try and give him meat, the infant can't eat the meat. They need milk. And so a lot of our young people need milk. They need the kerygma. They need a place to look at these questions, chew on them. And then we can get into these deeper, you know, I think the Catechism talks about this hierarchy of truths that we got to start with the foundation first.
Yeah. Yep.
So as we look at this and we want to make sure we have a curriculum that we're utilizing, what would be some things that would be essential as we prepare and for these conversations? How do we help this youth minister? Or, you know, you might have 8 kids, you might have 50 kids. How do we help these conversations take place?
You mean like during a setting them up during, let's say, like a class or a session?
Sure.
Yeah, man, that's a big question. I think, you know, one of the things is, as I was thinking about today in our conversation, to get nerdy, you know, the ecclesial method by Monsignor, or anyways, at Franciscan, I'm doing Franciscan a disservice. There was a call in the church to rediscover an evangelistic catechesis, and there's an element to, like, there is good catechesis and there's bad catechesis. And good catechesis is whatever most closely resembles the method modeled by the master, Jesus, like God's methodology of catechizing. And at the heart of it is something that's akin to Lectio Divina or other things like this, where you reflect on divine revelation or content, and you discern the kernel, the core proclamation, the thing that's like, you know, love means to will the good of the beloved, or you know, God didn't, like the core proclamation in the content. And I think one of probably the best things you could teach volunteers, or that they could practice, it's the same with Lectio Divina. If you really reflect on a short passage of scripture and there's one line or there's one summary or your kind of like way of articulating shorthand, the core proclamation that carries this like spiritual weight to it, and you feel your soul and your heart kind of like pick up a little bit. You know, Protestants might call it like the preacher's burden. You can, you know, these resources in the content of Alpha and Why Disciple, they have the gospel message in them. And so there's that practice of reflecting on the content that you might be showing, to the point where there's that personal reaction to it. Like there's that personal, like, I am being evangelized by this, and this is the heart of it. This is the proclamation. And if you walk away from this class and you just want this one thing, I just want you to know this one thing. I think that would be massive. That practice of prayerfully prepping with the content beforehand, not just intellectually so you know it, but like, what is the core thing? Like, like God became man so man might become God. And like you feel that because that means something to you and it's changing you. And you just at the end of the day, you want to talk about that and talk about how this changed you and how it can change them.
Yeah.
If I was to translate this quickly in like a 2-word thing, it's enter in. You have to enter in.
Yeah.
Don't just teach or be disconnected. You have to enter in with the process again.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that that image of treating catechesis like Lectio Divina. I love that. I know in my early parish ministry days, coming out of college with my theology degree, I was very zealous. And I wanted young people to know all the things that I knew. And I wanted to pass on, like I'd fallen in love with the Catholic intellectual tradition. Edmund, I think you and I would have been friends because I read all of the books you just dropped. And were you listening to those talks on tapes? Because I certainly was.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I was, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That,
Mostly other newer methods, though.
Yeah.
So,
well, the newer methods didn't exist when I was listening to them.
just make sure we establish that connection.
thank you.
Okay.
But I wanted to give them all of this. And the mistake that I made was, by way of analogy, like here in the Midwest, we've been experiencing drought for the last several years. My lawn was toast in May last year, and that's normally when it's like coming to life. And June happened, and we had the floodgates open, and we had all this rain come down, and we're like, yay, drought's over. Guess what? Drought's not over because the rain came too fast. It all ran off, and it actually caused some damage. And I think what I was doing in my early days with content was very similar to that. And it was coming from a good place. I wanted them to know all of these wonderful things, but I gave it all at once. It was like a downpour. And because of that, the ground wasn't ready to receive those truths. And so I love what you're talking about, Edmund, with what's the one thing? Like, can we say less so they can receive that one thing, not just into their minds, but into their hearts? And I've just never heard anybody compare it to Lectio Divina in that way. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of the beginner kind of mistakes that I fell into, and then we had to talk about a lot with first and second year volunteer catechists is that what is impactful for you, what the messages and the articulations of it that have changed your life might not be impactful for other people. So that's a very important point you make, Annie, is like, you have to not just look for the books and the talks and the expressions and the analogies and stories that transformed your life. You have to go to that proclamation, to that core message, you know?
I feel like what I'm hearing happened in your story, Edmund, in what we want to do with young people is we want to get them thinking. We want to give space and time for them to reflect on these questions and really arouse curiosity and help them recognize this hunger for more, right? And so we don't need to give it all at once, right? In this downpour, this fire hose, but we want to allow them to have an encounter with the Lord and then realize that there's so much here. Like this is a lifelong process. Yeah.
For the majority of people, there won't be that downpour, but would you guys say that there may be some individuals, although very infrequent, that maybe one or two that you see like, oh, to love them best, it is the downpour? I guess I'm asking the question because then I'm wondering, how do you discern the pace in which we need to run?
Sure.
Yeah, I love that. Dr. Petrock Wiley, I always forget how to pronounce his last name, so forgive me, Petrock, but he was the first person I could find in the early years that I would consider, or someone might consider, like an expert on the catechism. And it's really interesting because I was immediately doing the same thing I would do in the past, which is like, oh, let me cling to some expert on the catechism. And it's funny because he did a lot of work at the Franciscan at Home online, like volunteer training for catechesis. I went to one of their sessions where they were training mentors for the program. And they gave this beautiful, Dr. Petrarch in particular gave this beautiful reflection on the difference between experts and mentors, and that catechists are much more like mentors than experts. An expert stands in front of a student and says, I want to teach you. But a mentor in the, in antiquity, in times like in ancient Greece or maybe Rome, a mentor was a little more like a tutor, but not in the sense that they were the one that did the teaching. A mentor was someone maybe more like a nanny. It was someone who knew the family's kids so well and knew the experts. And so they knew the student really well, and they knew, oh, you're kind of rough on rhetoric, but you're really good at math, but and knew and stood beside the student and knew the student so well that they knew where to take them to and say, oh, you should look into this. You should meet with this person. You should read this book. And so I think the answer is in the question. Like, if you know that a teen is really just, it's like raising kids, it's like you just encourage the things that they get passionate about. So I think for sure Thomas Aquinas at 12, I would not want to be like, let's stop with the intellectual stuff. Let's just, you want to encourage that,
Yeah. Well, and I love that you point out that the key to it is personal. Is knowing the individual and what that person needs. Like, I can think of 2 students in my 20 years in ministry that what they desired was the fire hose. Like, they're very intellectual, both of them young women in this case. And it was handing them those books that you were talking about, Edmund. And then not just handing them the book and being like, well, converted, and then sitting down and talking with them. But it's all comes back to what you're saying, Edmund, is in order for that to happen, I needed to know her and her desire and her story and her intellect. And what was interesting about one of them is she was taking all the things she was learning and then bringing them into our small groups to other girls who weren't in that space. Yeah. And they were hearing it from her in a way they would never have heard it from me.
And that probably ignited new kind of conversations, and cool.
And I think it's important too to just reflect that we have this incredible tradition. We have a wealth of theology you could spend your whole life trying to consume. But that's the goal is relationship with the Lord. The goal is to allow that to transform our lives to be more like His. And so these opportunities to learn, we want to make sure that our faith is growing, right? Our trust in the Lord is growing, because nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus say, "Oh, it's by knowledge you've been saved," right?
Yeah.
So it has to, which goes back to this relationship again, like within the triune God, that we're invited into that space.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm hearing everyone say is, typically right now in the space of confirmation across the USA, we need to take a slower approach and go at the pace of relationship, and that is going to generally be slower. But very sporadically are there going to be moments that the downpour will happen. But that doesn't mean it's better or worse. It just means that the filter comes, that understanding comes through the filter of relationship. And so the content you should be ready to go at the pace in which God is growing something in the heart of that young person.
Yes. Okay. And so for the context of the person doing confirmation preparation, this means you can't do it all by yourself, because you have to get to know the person in front of you and where they are and have that accompaniment. So how did you, Edmund, in your space of doing this, like what were some of the practical things you did so that they could get content in a relational way and have the space to process it?
Yeah, I mean, these aren't my brilliant, I guess, ideas. I mean, I'm a product of, like Franciscan and then the evangelical renewal of catechesis. But I think of the methodologies of John Bosco, and then also just the ecclesial method that we mentioned. But in general, the method you see throughout Scripture kind of takes on a similar shape, and there's something that suddenly kind of is surprising, that kind of takes people out of the place that they're already in. So an angel appears to Mary, or there's a bush that's on fire, and it's surprising and it's interesting. There's this preparation for the proclamation of the gospel that kind of takes them out of it. And so that could be an interesting clip from a movie. It could be a question you ask. It could be the way you restructure all the seats in your classroom. It could be standing outside the classroom and talking to people before you go in. So there's this preparation. Then there's the proclamation. Like, what is the core proclamation of the gospel that's being proclaimed in this particular situation? And then there's the unpacking of that. There's the let's together unpack this. So I think, and then, finally there's like, now what do we do? Like the application. And I also think of St. Francis Xavier comes to mind, and him running through, basically sprinting through India. Just, he can't baptize people fast enough. And you imagine, back then, you don't have a lot of the content, the resources, you might not even have, books or things written down. He just taught them the 4 pillars of the catechism, but he taught them to memorize the creed, to understand, just to know the sacraments, to memorize the 10 commandments, and to memorize the Our Father. And the catechism really brilliantly uses that framework. So that's, it wouldn't take that long. You could write down on a piece of paper those 4 things.
Yeah.
But the framework for the whole deposit of faith hangs on that. And you could spend the rest of your life writing books on just, the fact that God is Trinity. So those are some of the things that I always came up with the best ideas when I thought about it from that approach. How do I get people's attention? How do I try to take them out of wherever they've been and get them to the point where they're really asking, really wanting to know the proclamation before we give it to them? So like, how do you build that curiosity and openness?
Well, we are, thanks be to God, in a digital age where there are some beautiful resources that, after the confirmation session or even after the sacrament, people can continue to ask these questions. And what does the church say? One of the projects I know you've worked on, Real+True. Can you share a little bit about what that is and how that connected with those 4 pillars?
And actually, can you clarify a long-running debate I've had? Is it Real+True or Real and True or Real+ and True?
Real+ and True sounds great. I want to tattoo this as Real+ and True.
Done.
And he's good at making stuff up.
The official stance is it's both. But yeah, I mean,
That's so
it's
Catholic
brilliant
of you.
marketing, man. It's brilliant marketing. Just keep people questioning, and
Both and.
that's the startle, getting them in.
Yeah, the hallmark of a really good brand and name is that people go, "What the heck is this?" So yeah, I mean, man, 4 or 5 years ago, I met Edmundo Reyes and Emily Mentok, who worked at the Archdiocese of Detroit in communications and brilliant content and digital evangelists. They also had seen me hang out in a car and read like a paragraph from the catechism on a social clip or something. So they were like, we gotta like talk to this guy. So the idea of a project came to mind was, what if we created content that tried to do what Father Raniero Cancel Mesa said, which is like, take the catechism, be inspired by it, and create video content that would do some of these steps, or that would attempt to do some of these steps of what we talked about, the catechetical methodology. And that was the crazy idea. And then so we pitched the idea to OSV, and they thankfully funded it so that it's free to the world. And it's a 4-year project, 1 year for each pillar of the catechism. And then each month is a unit. So we split each pillar into 12 units. Each unit has 3 videos. The first one is kind of that curiosity. It's not explicitly teaching, but it's kind of trying to pique curiosity about a topic to get you talking. So one is like, one of our favorites is on call and response. Why is call and response in music and concerts so interesting and captivating? And so it kind of sets you up to be asking these deeper questions about what it means to be a human person or spirituality by the end. And it sets up the next video, which is explicitly kind of what's the teaching of the church in 3 to 5 minutes. And then the last video is the live action. That's me. It's like a YouTube style video where it's like, how do we apply it? So yeah, it's translated into multiple languages. It's really crazy.
Wow.
It's shared all over the world, and it was recognized by the Vatican Council for the New Evangelization as like a project worthy of the new evangelization. So,
wow.
And again, we had the same conversations you guys had, or you had mentioned, like when we were talking with OSV about this, we said, this can't just be a curriculum that it can't be something that is offered to a catechist or a volunteer as like, just put this on and step away. It like has to be these resources that you could pick from. So like you're handed the scroll, which one are you going to pick?
Yeah.
And how are you going to use that? Use it at the beginning, or use it during teaching, or use it afterwards, or send it in an email. But how do you use it to help in your task of catechesis and evangelization?
That's awesome. That's great.
Love it.
Edmund, this has been an excellent conversation. Your wisdom has just brought so much clarity around all the things we've been talking about. Where can our listeners find you?
Me?
Yeah.
Like my home address?
No.
I mean, if
What
you
project
want
you working
to,
on
you
now that they can
but-
tap into?
Yeah, edmundmitchell.com, or I'm the most active on Instagram. And so that's the main point. And then if you're a parish minister, I started a community for parish ministers where it's an online membership community that specifically focuses on the other 35 hours of your week. So how do you do your job really well and still, keep that missionary spirituality? So
I love that. That's so great. That's so great.
So we've been asking every guest the same question, and this is how we end our time. So get ready. There we go.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be about the topic. Well, it has to be about confirmation, but it doesn't have to be about what we talked about with content still isn't king. But what is your one piece of advice to anyone listening regarding confirmation?
To anyone listening, particularly volunteers, or...
We will definitely have volunteers listening to this.
Ministry
if you want the
leaders,
audience,
meaning youth ministers, DREs, maybe the bivocational youth minister
people.
who's a volunteer.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, my one piece of advice, this is kind of a secret about my personality and myself, but my one piece of advice actually would be, ask yourself, what if your disadvantages were your unique advantages? So whatever your confirmation program or situation or context, if you're the director, if you're a volunteer, if you don't have enough sessions scheduled, if you don't have kids that really want to be there, like what if you took some time prayerfully to ask yourself, what if this could be a huge advantage? How would I capitalize on the fact that none of these kids want to be here? And I think throughout my time in ministry, that was really helpful and allowed me to stay grateful and joyful, but also come up with really, really creative ways to actually reach people person to person.
I love
That's
it.
great.
It's reminded me of the loaves and fishes, right? Like all these people, I'm at a disadvantage here, and then bringing that to the Lord and saying, multiply, fix this, and letting the Lord do it. I love that.
Yep.
Oh, brother, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your ministry and witness, and we look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm really honored. You guys are pros.
No, I think you're the pro, man. We want to lean in more into what you're doing. That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Really grateful for you, man.
Thank you.
All right, Jason, Annie. That was a lot.
Yeah.
We went through a lot there, and probably addressing one of the big things that people think about when they think through confirmation. And I think, Annie, you told me like one of the number one things searched on Google is confirmation resources and content, right?
Yeah.
And we're saying content still isn't king. Yeah. And then talked about content. So
because it matters.
It does matter.
Right?
It totally matters.
Like the truth matters.
It,
but we can't just throw truth
Yes.
at young people without doing the work of accompaniment.
Yes. So my question for you guys is, what's the thing that you're walking away with in this conversation with Edmund?
Two things. One, as we contextualize this, we have to know our audience, right? And I'm thinking of St. Paul in the Areopagus, and he finds a way to bring the gospel into their culture and present it in a way they can understand so that they can process it. So contextualization, and then relationship. Like we talking at people with truth does not bear fruit. There has to be this movement that we see in Jesus when he encounters people and his love for them, and the love opens their heart, which allows them to hear the truth.
Yeah. And the big thing that I want to take away is his focus on saying less, right? And even in our preparation, being focused and doing one thing. I think that's a mistake that we often make. And again, it comes from such a good place. Like, I have encountered the truth of the faith and I want other people to know it. But we often jump many levels beyond that. And it just doesn't land. You know, one of the things I was thinking about as in that conversation was, there's an article I read from Notre Dame's Church Life Journal. The author, I believe his name is Leonard De Lorenzo. He's talking about how looking at content, he's specifically talking about curriculum, and making it the best, most orthodox curriculum, which is, again, super important. But if we're giving it to people who don't have a lived experience of the Catholic faith, don't have a lived experience of what he calls the Catholic imagination, is just doing a wrong thing righter, is what he says in the article. And that has always stuck with me, that we can't just throw better content at people. And one of the things that Edmund was talking about that I would have loved to spend more time talking about is he kept bringing up questions. Yeah. Like, what are we asking them? Not just what are we giving them, but what are we asking them? I think we could do an entire episode, which we do not have time on asking great questions, right? Yeah. Because it's not just enough to present true things. We need to have a conversation.
And I love at the very end that he was talking about, what's the one thing that you gave advice for anyone, stepping into this leading confirmation? And he was like, whatever is your disadvantage, what if it could be your advantage?
Yes.
And, okay, I know we got to wrap this up, but quickly, when you think of that, you go back to your younger self running confirmation, what's the quick disadvantage? It'd be like, what if that was an advantage? Like, what was the disadvantage for you, Annie?
It's what he was saying. Like, I have all these kids here who don't want to be here.
Is that that's a common thing?
Yes.
It's very common.
It is.
If you're listening to this and you feel like, oh, I'm a terrible human because they don't want to be here, it's actually quite common.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes. And it took me a really long time to realize, like, oh my gosh, Jesus has just given you 150 souls who don't know me yet. And that was a gift. Yes, instead of a burden.
Yeah.
And what about you, Jason?
Confirmation parents were the bane of my existence for many years. God bless them.
Yeah.
And I made the arrogant mistake of being like, oh, give me your kids. I got this.
Yeah.
Woe is me. Forgive me, Lord. Actually empowering and helping parents become a faith witness in their home, reminding them that the first church is a domestic church. They're the primary catechists as the church. Like, we have to be doing this with them.
Yeah.
And that's not easy, but we got to start.
So if you're listening to this and you feel disappointed or disadvantaged or overwhelmed, you're in good company. And I love the posture of, like, let's give it back to the Lord and say, Lord, this is your mission to begin with that I get to engage with. Help. That's probably the most brave thing that we could do, is say help. And I think the Lord will unlock some innovation for us, but all. So, all right, my friends, the Lord has you where he wants you. and this is good. Let's keep chatting about the space of confirmation and love young people well.